The first camera workshop we did was in September, and we were shown different types of equipment for filmmaking. For example, tripods, cameras, and the accessories for the devices. Examples of cameras that we looked at were Blackmagic URSA Mini 4K, which is what we ended up using for our thriller. Therefore, we focused on that the most as it's the easiest for indoor and outdoor locations, whilst also being the best quality. And we also looked at Sony FS100. We learnt the rules, yours and mine, and also how to set up a camera safely so we don't damage any expensive lenses when we shoot for our thrillers. This included using the Spirit to level the camera to make panning, zooming, and titling accurately. We also went through ISO levels and balancing, which led into Camera Workshop 2 when we worked in groups to shoot a scene. We learned to film in a specific order by shooting the wide shot first, then the other shots. To make the scene more interesting, we learned to shoot through the rule of thirds, which engages the audience by choosing what we put into the foreground and background, and choosing whether our scene is asymmetrical or symmetrical. The process of call-outs allowed us to know when the camera is rolling and in action, which was essential when shooting our thriller sequence. We also learnt the 180-degree rule, which was important so the audience aren't confused about who's who and where. In this workshop, we were taught about continuity, which allows shots to relate to each other, allowing the audience to understand the scene, which led into the process in which we edited our scene. We used Adobe Premiere Pro CC to edit our scenes and learnt handy shortcuts such as Command and S, which quickly saved our scene whilst editing. There are technical names such as rushes and dailies, which were useful to know for our thriller sequence, as we could find our unedited clips in the bins on the left. The timeline is where we edited the order of our shots and put them all together on a visual line. From this knowledge, we learnt how to film with sound and edit with sound. We created a storyline where we filmed our shot in wide and then the other shots after. We took in mind all of the rules we were taught in the previous workshops. We found that our group could have planned the sequence better if we took more time in planning it. This made our thriller sequence better as we knew that we had to spend a long time planning beforehand. We used all of our knowledge to edit the sequence whilst also learning how to edit audio footage and video footage together to create a scene. The video on the timeline is placed above the audio, which can be unlinked to allow a subtle and smooth transition from one shoot to another without volume problems. In the next camera workshop, we used a prop, which was a gun, and we followed the same rules as we were taught to create this scene. When editing, we used a muzzle flash effect so we could hear the gunshot as well as see it. We went through our school cloud, which could be accessed by all computers, and chose the visual muzzle flash that we wanted and pasted this on top of our shot through After Effects. We changed the size and position through the arrows or changed the numbers next to the timeline. After all this, we finally started to plan our thriller sequence after being allocated groups. We took into consideration the number of characters and actors, location, basic props, and roles of us as a group, for example, who was on camera, who was editing, and who was director. We also went through a step-by-step idea which we would then have to shoot as a practice for our real thriller. For this, we found that there were many difficulties, although these were not the actors we wished to use and we only had a small iPhone camera that we used. Through feedback, we found there was too much background information and had to change our idea, as it is meant to be an opening sequence rather than a scene from a film. We also found that running was too intense for the beginning of our sequence, so we changed our idea. After we worked out our final idea, I researched how to create binocular effects, which was extremely useful for the final product of our thriller. Involves editing like a muzzle flash on After Effects. We then created a storyboard, which is a visual representation of all the shots in order of our sequence. This allowed us to see what we want our sequence to look like, as well as reading about the shot so we can understand what is happening in each shot. For our scene, we needed a fake brick as well as real bricks, which would be used to help kill the man in our sequence. We looked online and realised it would take too long and didn't look real. Therefore, we ended up cutting a large sponge, painting it red and making it dirty with mud to give a brick red colour and less bright. We also bought in cans which were used for the scene. Before the shoot, we created a shot list, which was every single shot out of order, but would be in the order of actually filming rather than storyline, so we could film more efficiently and waste less time. We sorted our shots by character to make it easier to film, without going back and forth with each person. We included the shot number, location, camera angle, camera movement, description, and character. We placed all of our skills that we had learnt and planned carefully to create the final product of our thriller called Endurance. We shot at Delta Force, which was planned as we thought the location was ideal, with it being placed in the woods, with ruined and run-down building which looks post-apocalyptic. We chose a cabin to show where the man had been living by placing newspapers and a blanket. We all multi-rolled and took turns in shooting all of the shots. Because the weather was rainy, we had to cover the camera with an umbrella so we wouldn't get rain on the lens, which would ruin our shots and also would be expensive to replace if it broke. After this, we used Adobe Pro CC, which was what we used in the past in our camera workshops, so we were familiar with it. We constructed an order which we would follow when editing, starting with the picture cut, the sound cut, and then the effects and titles. We unlinked the audio from the picture so that we could edit the sound better and put in a constant gain, which would stop clipping and air pressure changes as we filmed outside, which would allow us to create a smooth sounding sequence. When editing, we had to make sure we had cause and effect moments, where a character looks at something and then the camera switches to what they are looking at. We added a fade at the end to show that it's the end of the sequence, and also added titles at the beginning so we can introduce the important information that the narrative doesn't give you, such as the production company and the director's name. We also had to make different copies of the sequences. For example, start with the unedited footage on the timeline, then the picture cut, then the sound cut, then the effects cut, which allow us to move a step back if we make any mistakes or if anything is lost. To create the title sequence, we had to place certain titles in a certain order, being the funding company, which develops the film in pre-production, the production company, which helps to create the film, the director's name film, which introduces the director, the main star, the film title, actors 1 to 5, casting, costume, music, producer, editors, production designer, director of photography, executive producer, produced by, based upon, screenplay writer, and director.